Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel where today we are doing my March end of month wrap up. So basically we're going to look at all the books that I read or DNF'd in the last 2 weeks of March. If you're interested in what I read or DNF'd in the first 2 weeks, I will go ahead and leave my mid-month wrap up linked down below. In that video, I discussed the books The Crown of Embers and The Bitter Kingdom by Ray Carson, The Self-Care Solution by Jennifer Ashton, and You'll Never Believe What Happened to Lacey by Amber Ruffin and Lacey Lamar. Again, if you're interested in my thoughts on those books, I will leave my mid-month wrap-up link down below. But let's just go ahead and jump in with all the things that I read or attempted to read in the last 2 weeks. And the very first thing that I finished was Caliban's War by James S.A. Corey, the second book in the Expanse series. So this is an adult science fiction series. It's a little bit difficult to sum up, and it's even difficult to come up with a description for just this book because it's so intertwined with the first book that it's just like the vaguest description ever, you guys. I just don't even know how to do it. So yeah, but I did do a full-length review on this book already. If you're interested, I'll leave the review linked down below. But basically, I liked it. For the world building, we switched over to really taking a dive into the politics on Earth, which I thought was very interesting. The storyline itself, I really enjoyed, and I thought it was pretty well done. But unfortunately, the weak point of these books still seems to be the characters. There's just not quite enough even though we got more development and more a wider variety of characters, we still didn't get a ton of development. I still think they are underdeveloped, and it does make me a little sad. But I'm still hopeful that we'll get more development as the series goes on. But overall, I still ended up enjoying this, and I gave it 4 stars. After that, I attempted to read The Bird King by G. Willow Wilson. And this is a historical fantasy set in 1491 in the last sultanate of the Iberian Peninsula. And we're following our main character of Fatima, and she is a concubine to the Sultan. And essentially there is an envoy from the newly formed Spain that have come to discuss the terms of surrender with the Sultan. And Fatima takes one of the members of that envoy to meet her best friend Hassan, and this person realizes that Hassan has magic, and part of the terms of the surrender mean that Hassan needs to be turned over to the Spanish Inquisition. And so Fatima and Hassan decide to flee the palace and try to find some place where they can just be themselves. So I have already done a book discussion on this book. I did not do a review because I DNF'd it. I did DNF this at page about 170 for very personal reasons. If you're interested as to why I DNF'd it, which is a reason that is not going to be applicable to most people, you can go ahead and watch the book discussion. I also discussed what I thought of the book up until that point, but in general, I think that it just didn't quite do enough with character development or world building or plot development in the beginning. But we're setting up for some really interesting character development, setting up for some really interesting plot development. And so it looked like that's where we were headed. And so I feel comfortable saying, if you're interested in this book, give it a try, because A, you're not likely to have the problems with the writing style that I had that caused me to DNF it. And it looked like we were going into some really interesting areas. I will say there are definitely content warnings for this book, primarily because Fatima is in fact a concubine and she is a slave, so she has no choice in the matter, and she's definitely got feelings about it. We do not see any on-page relations between the Sultan and Fatima, but she has to deal with her feelings about it, so proceed with caution. After that, I read The $1,000 Tan Line not by Veronica Mars, it's a Veronica Mars tie-in. It's The $1,000 Tan Line by Rob Thomas and Jennifer Graham, a Veronica Mars tie-in novel. And this is a mystery, and we're following Veronica Mars as she is trying to figure out what happened with this disappearance of this girl on spring break. And I liked this. I mean, I like Veronica Mars, so I really enjoyed this. The lack of character development didn't bother me because I already knew a lot of the characters. If you like Veronica Mars, a lot of our favorites make an appearance. It was good, and I actually think the mystery was very solid. Not the best mystery I have ever read, but still very, very solid. If you like Veronica Mars, this is a good addition. However, if you don't, I wouldn't necessarily say go out of your way to pick it up because, like, it's a solid mystery, but it's not amazing. However, I will say this has helped me realize I love the mystery and the conning that is in Veronica Mars, and I hate the people drama that is in Veronica Mars. And so this helped me come to the conclusion that I am probably never going to rewatch the series. I'm never going to watch the movie, and I'm okay with that because it's just not generally to my taste. Now, like I said, I did like this. I gave it 3.5 stars, and I do have every intention of picking up the next book in the series. Although once I read that, I probably will be done with Veronica Mars entirely. After that, I read Eldest by Christopher Paolini, the second book in the Inheritance cycle. And this is a young adult fantasy book about Aragon, and Aragon in the first book finds this blue stone, which turns out to be a dragon egg, which hatches for him, and he becomes the first dragon rider in like a century. And the story goes from there. I will be perfectly honest, I did not like Aragon when I read it. The only reason I read it, and the only reason I read this book, is because my older child picked it out for me. He asked me to read it. That is something he's allowed to do every other month, and those are the only books that I refuse to DNF. So I read Aragon. I didn't like Aragon for a variety of reasons. I would have DNF'd it in the beginning if it had been my choice, but I ended up rating it 2.75 stars on the strength of the ending. So I wasn't excited to pick this book up, and I don't think that a review for me is honestly all that fair because I wouldn't have picked this up if it were up to me. But I ended up giving it 2.5 stars for my personal enjoyment, as well as some issues. But what I will say is if you liked the first book, you'll probably like this one. And if you didn't like the first book, I don't think this one is going to change your mind. It is a tropey mess, and I think it would be actually a fun tropey mess if it weren't quite so slow. So I didn't love this, but I read it. I finished it. Now, because I was not looking forward to reading Eldest, I did go ahead and pick up a variety of books to read alongside Eldest as kind of a reward for continuing on in the book, and just to kind of mix up things so I didn't get bogged down. And one of the books was The Simpsons and Their Mathematical Secrets by Simon Singh. And this is an adult nonfiction book, exactly as what it says. It is about the Simpsons TV show and the mathematical references that are made within that TV show. I have already done a review on it. Now, this review does not follow my normal structure because it doesn't generally work. So instead I did 3 pros and 3 cons, and I will leave it linked down below if you are interested. But essentially, it didn't meet my expectations. I really thought it was going to be like a bunch of examples of mathematical references, and like maybe we get into explaining some of the math and why it's important and, you know, what it's used for and that kind of thing, and then move on to the next example. And we just got a ton of extra stuff like math history and the history of like the personal history of some of the writers on the show, and I just didn't really want it. I'm not gonna lie, I didn't really want it. I will say, however, that Simon Singh does a really good job of taking some of these complex topics and writing them in a way that I think most people would actually understand what is going on with the math. And because it's such a small part, like you can even skip those explanations if you don't really care. But I do think that the author did a good job of it. But it really didn't meet my expectations. I didn't enjoy it as much as I wanted to, and I ended up giving this 3.5 stars. Now, at this point in the month, I realized that there were only 2 more books left on my March TBR to read, and that was Calculated Risks by Shauna Maguire and Blood Heir by Ilona Andrews. But I didn't want to start those and read them at the same time as Eldest because those are both books that I want to read by themselves and just focus on that one story. And so I decided to go ahead and push those forward into April and just try a bunch of stuff from April that I was that I was a little bit on the fence about whether I was going to like it or not. And I ended up DNFing a lot of them. So let's jump in with all of those books that I tried. So first up is House Immortal by Devon Monk, and this is an adult urban fantasy, and we're following our main character, a Matilda, who was stitched together from various parts, kind of Frankenstein-ish, but she thinks she's the only one that is like this until somebody just like her shows up on her front porch, and the story goes from there. Now, urban fantasy is very hit or miss for me. Devon Monk is an author that I have really tried hard to like and have yet to find anything that works for me. So I was very wary going into this, and it just did not work for me. And part of that is because urban fantasy tends to be very fast paced, which means that you have to balance out in the beginning how much new stuff you're introducing that is specific to your world with the explanations of those things, because the explanations slow down the pace, which you don't generally want to do. And I think that the author didn't get it right. We got so much new stuff introduced to us with no explanation that it just didn't really work for me. Especially because I wasn't interested in any of the new stuff. I didn't find any of it to be interesting. So I didn't really care to stick around to find the explanation. I put this book down at page 12 because like I think my kid asked me a question or something, and after I was done answering, I realized I went to pick up this book and I realized I didn't want to pick this book back up, so I just went ahead and DNF'd it. After that, I attempted Blackbirds by Chuck Wendig. So this is also an adult urban fantasy. We're following our main character of Miriam, and with a touch, she can see when and how you are going to die. And she ends up hitching a ride from a trucker, and she finds out that he's going to die in a month with her name on his lips. And so she sets about trying to change fate. I was very wary going into this one because, again, urban fantasy, but also because Chuck Wendig has a very particular writing style online in his online writing. And I didn't know if that was going to come through in this particular novel, and I can say that yes, it does. It's not a writing style that I gel with in general, so I didn't really appreciate that. Miriam is generally unlikable. I read in reviews that she just kind of stays an unlikable character, which I'm not really a fan of. And so I DNF'd this at page 30. I will also say that we do see all of the scenes where people, like when she touches a person, she sees when and how they're going to die, right? So do we as the audience. So if you have anxiety around death, be very, very cautious with this book. It was definitely enough to trigger my own anxiety, which has also contributed to me wanting to put down this book. Yeah. So then after that, I attempted The Girl in the Steel Corset by Kady Cross. So this is the first book in the Steampunk Chronicles, and it's a YA steampunk adventure where we're following our main character of Finley Jane, who has a little bit of a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde situation going on with her, but she is accepted into this band of misfits, and she thinks she's finally found her people, but an evil person comes along and like threatens this group. Now, there is actually the prequel novella that is included in this book, which I read and I really enjoyed. It's called The Strange Case of Finley Jane, and it's very much a mystery, which was awesome, and I really enjoyed it for what it was. I think I gave it like 3.5 stars. It was just a fun little bit of adventure. So I walked in very hopeful to the novel, but unfortunately, the parts that I liked about the novella were not really present in the novel. It wasn't so much focused on, it wasn't a fast-paced mystery, right, in this steampunk setting. And the other things that I didn't like were much more prominent. And one of the things, for example, was that There's like various scenes where our characters are introspective, and I think they're terribly written. There's going to be a very strong YA romance, which I am just not about. And so I decided to go ahead and just DNF this at page 67 because this is a reread, and I remember this being the best book in the series, and I'm like already not having a good time. So I'm going to let it go. After that, I attempted Imposter by Susanne Winnacker. And this is a young adult science fiction mystery, and we're following our main character of Tessa, and she has the ability to touch your skin and absorb information about your DNA to the point where she can replicate your body. And so she's going to use this ability to insert herself into a girl's life to try to track down a serial killer. So I made it 40 pages in this book before I DNF'd it, and I just had a lot of problems with the world building. It didn't make sense. So Tessa is actually part of this branch of the FBI that almost nobody knows about. Okay, fine. But like, and she's supposed to have been training for the last 2 years, but I'm not entirely certain what she was doing with training because she doesn't seem to know anything. And especially given her particular special abilities, like that's like prime field assignment kind of ability, and yet she doesn't know how to defend herself almost at all. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. And then Tessa herself doesn't really make sense. So I was really struggling with that, and I ended up DNFing it at page 40 when she decided to use her ability to do something that is ethically problematic. And I was like, I'm just done. I'm just not here for that. So I DNF'd it. Yeah. And that was the last book that I even attempted in March. A lot of DNFs, which I guess it's just going to be a thing for the beginning of the year. I have had a lot of DNFs thus far. So now I'm actually going to do something that I have not done before, which is that I am going to tell you what I'm going to actually do with all these books. So I don't think that, at least for the foreseeable future, that I will film a separate video for my unhauls, because I know what I'm going to do with the books after I've read them. I already know. They don't go back on my shelf if I'm not going to, because I already know that I'm going to unhaul them. So I'll let you know what I'm doing with each of the books at the end of each of these wrap-ups. So we're going to go ahead and start with Caliban's War and the Simpsons and their mathematical secrets. These are going back to the library where I got them from. And then Eldest is going back to my older child's bookshelf because it is his copy. I am going to go ahead and put all of these DNF'd books directly onto my unhaul pile. So that is Bird King, House Immortal, Blackbirds, The Girl in the Steel Corset, and Imposter. They're just going directly onto the unhaul pile, where hopefully they will leave my house soon. Also going onto the unhaul pile is the rest of the Steampunk Chronicles by Kady Cross. If I can't make it through the first book, I'm not even going to attempt books 2 through 4. But that is The Girl in the Clockwork Collar, The Girl with the Iron Touch, and The Girl with the Wind-Up Heart. And then the last book to discuss is Veronica Mars, The $1,000 Tan Line, and this is going to go up on my purgatory shelf up here as a visual reminder to pick up the second book in the series. But likely after I read the second book in the series, I will probably be unhauling this as well. But I'll let you know when it comes up. For now, it's going on the purgatory shelf. But that is it, you guys. Leave me comments down below with what you read in the month of March. If you have any thoughts or feelings about any of the books I discussed in this particular video. But that is all I have. So if you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. And until next time, have happy reading, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!